The chill winds sweeping across the desolate farmlands of Plainfield, Wisconsin in the mid-20th century carried more than just the scent of pine and rich earth. They whispered tales of isolation, of a man named Ed Gein, whose life was as barren and solitary as the landscape around his dilapidated farmhouse. Here, in this quiet, unassuming town, a shadow began to lengthen, cast by a figure who seemed at first glance to be nothing more than a reclusive eccentric. Ed Gein lived a life profoundly shaped by his domineering mother, Augusta, whose oppressive influence would carve the twisted path he eventually walked. Augusta Gein was a woman of rigid religious fanaticism, her worldview steeped in fire and brimstone condemnation of women, sexuality, and anything she deemed sinful. She instilled in young Ed a deep-seated fear of the world outside their farm, painting all women, save herself, as harlots and instruments of the devil. This constant barrage of puritanical dogma and fear-mongering stunted Ed's social development, leaving him a shy, awkward man, utterly dependent on his mother. He had no friends, no romantic interests, only Augusta's suffocating presence. Her death, a pivotal and devastating event for Ed, left him utterly alone in the decaying farmhouse, adrift in a world he barely understood and deeply feared. It was then, in the suffocating silence of his solitude, that Ed's long simmering eccentricities began to curdle into something far more sinister. With Augusta gone, the last tether to any semblance of normalcy snapped. Ed's initial fascination with death and the human body, perhaps a morbid curiosity born from his isolated existence and his mother's teachings about the fragility of the flesh, began to manifest in terrifying ways. His first transgression was grave robbing, driven by a desperate pathological desire to be with his mother, to somehow recreate her presence, or perhaps even become her. He began to exhume bodies from local cemeteries. These were not random acts. He sought out recently buried middle-aged women, their faces bearing a haunting resemblance to Augusta. This macabre hobby, initially a secret solace, was a gradual escalation from mere curiosity to deeply disturbing acts. The boundaries of societal norms, already flimsy in his isolated mind, crumbled entirely. The quiet calm of Plainfield was shattered by the first disappearances. Mary Hogan, a local tavern owner, vanished without a trace. Her absence sent a ripple of unease through the community, yet no one immediately suspected the quiet, unassuming Ed Gein. He was known to frequent her establishment, a familiar, if somewhat peculiar, face. The chilling detail that Ed was intimately familiar with his victim, a regular patron of her business, underscores the insidious nature of his emerging depravity. He moved among them, a wolf in sheep's clothing, his sinister intentions hidden beneath a veneer of harmlessness. As more people went missing, a slow, creeping dread began to permeate Plainfield. Whispers circulated, anxieties mounted, but Ed Gein remained largely above suspicion. He was just Odd Ed, the man who lived alone on the old farm, seemingly too meek to harm a fly. The community's perception of him as innocuous only deepened the horror that was silently unfolding. The tension in Plainfield tightened with each passing day, an unspoken fear hanging heavy in the air, a precursor to the unimaginable revelations that lay just beneath the surface of their quiet town. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The unspoken fear in Plainfield finally crystallized into a terrifying reality with the disappearance of Bernice Warden. On a cold November morning in 1957, the hardware store owner vanished, leaving behind a telltale blood trail leading from her establishment. Ed Gein, known to be her last customer, quickly became the central figure in a burgeoning investigation. His truck was seen near the store, his demeanor unusually agitated. The community's perception of him as merely Odd Ed was about to be irrevocably shattered. Law enforcement, initially hesitant to suspect such an unassuming individual, could no longer ignore the mounting evidence. The blood, the missing woman, and Ed's evasiveness during initial questioning all pointed to a single, horrifying conclusion. Sheriff Arthur Schley and Captain Frank Warden, Bernice's son, led the grim procession to Ed's isolated farmhouse. What they discovered there defied all comprehension, plunging them into a nightmare far beyond anything their small-town imaginations could conjure. The air inside the dilapidated dwelling was thick with the stench of decay, and something far more sinister, a scent that clung to the very walls. The initial shock of finding Bernice Warden's decapitated body hanging upside down in the summer kitchen, gutted like a deer, was merely the prelude to a series of increasingly grotesque revelations. The dimly lit rooms of the farmhouse slowly yielded their unspeakable secrets, each discovery more horrifying than the last. The nightmare inside Ed Gein's home was a macabre exhibition of his twisted artistry. Human remains were not merely stored, but integrated into the very fabric of his existence. Bowls crafted from human skulls sat on shelves, their empty eye sockets seeming to stare back at the investigators. Chairs were upholstered with human skin, and lampshades were fashioned from the same ghastly material, casting an eerie, flickering glow on the scene. A vest made of human skin, complete with breasts, hung near the fireplace, a chilling testament to his desire for transformation. Skulls were sawn in half, serving as soup bowls, and a collection of vulvas was found in a shoebox. These were not the trophies of a serial killer in the traditional sense, but the grotesque creations of a man who had blurred the lines between the living and the dead, the human and the inanimate. Ed's disturbed mind, investigators would later learn, harbored a profound and terrifying obsession. He confessed to grave robbing, exhuming bodies from local cemeteries, driven by a pathological desire to recreate his deceased mother. He sought out middle-aged women, often those who resembled Augusta, and brought their bodies back to the farm. His motivations were complex, a chilling cocktail of necrophilia and a desperate attempt to embody or resurrect his mother. He spoke of creating a woman suit, a macabre ensemble of human skin, which he would wear, attempting to transform himself into a female figure, perhaps even Augusta herself. His actions were not driven by sexual pleasure in the conventional sense, but by a profound psychological need to connect with the dead, to possess and transform them, blurring the lines between life and death, self and other. The revelations sent shockwaves through Plainfield. Disbelief quickly morphed into horror, then into a profound sense of betrayal. The quiet, unassuming man they had known, the odd but harmless neighbor who occasionally babysat children, was in fact a monster. The community grappled with the terrifying reality that such unspeakable evil had lived among them, hidden in plain sight. The psychological impact was immense and lasting. Trust was shattered, innocence lost. The very fabric of their small, tight-knit community was irrevocably torn, leaving an indelible scar on the collective psyche of Plainfield, Wisconsin, a town forever marked by the atrocities committed within Ed Gein's decaying farmhouse. Ed's confession arrived with a chilling calm, a stark contrast to the unspeakable horrors he had meticulously crafted. During interrogation, he recounted his grotesque actions with an almost detached demeanor, as if discussing mundane farm chores. His placid disposition only deepened the public's revulsion and fascination. The legal proceedings that followed were a spectacle of national attention, dragging the quiet town of Plainfield into a glaring, macabre spotlight. Ed Gein pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, a plea that ignited fierce debate among legal and mental health professionals alike. The court, grappling with the unprecedented nature of his crimes, ultimately deemed him mentally unfit to stand trial, a decision that would shape the remainder of his life. His subsequent incarceration began in mental institutions, a stark, sterile world far removed from the decaying farmhouse that had served as his personal charnel house. Within the confines of these institutions, Ed Gein lived a relatively peaceful existence, a disturbing tranquility after the storm of his atrocities. The debate surrounding his sanity never truly ceased. Was he a cunning psychopath, fully aware of his actions, or a deeply disturbed individual lost to the darkest corners of his own mind? The answers remained elusive, trapped within the labyrinthine pathways of his fractured psyche. He spent decades institutionalized, fading from the sensational headlines into the quiet, controlled routine of mental health care, until his death in 1984. Yet, Ed Gein's story, grisly and unsettling as it was, refused to fade into obscurity. It seeped into the cultural consciousness, a dark wellspring from which some of the most iconic figures in horror fiction would spring. The chilling tale of his isolated life, his domineering mother, and his macabre creations provided fertile ground for the imaginations of authors and filmmakers. Norman Bates, the troubled proprietor of the Bates Motel in Psycho, with his Oedipal complex and taxidermy hobby, bore an undeniable resemblance to Gein. Leatherface, the chainsaw-wielding cannibal from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Buffalo Bill, the skin-suit-wearing serial killer in The Silence of the Lambs, all drew heavily from the horrifying blueprint Ed Gein laid bare. His legacy became a testament to the enduring fascination with true crime and the human capacity for unimaginable evil, continually haunting and captivating audiences across generations. For Plainfield, the aftermath was a long, arduous struggle for normalcy. The town, once a picture of idyllic rural life, was forever scarred by the monster who had walked among them. The infamous farmhouse, the epicenter of such unspeakable acts, became a grotesque tourist attraction, drawing morbid curiosity seekers from far and wide. To reclaim their peace and erase the physical manifestation of their nightmare, the community collectively decided to destroy Ed's home. It was burned to the ground, a symbolic act of purification, an attempt to cleanse the land of its tainted past. However, the lingering shadow of the monster, the unsettling knowledge of what had transpired, remained. Plainfield would always be that town, forever linked to the name Ed Gein. The story of Ed Gein leaves us with chilling, unresolved questions that echo across the decades. What does it say about human nature, about the insidious power of isolation, and the darkness that can fester beneath the most ordinary of facades? His tale serves as a horrifying narrative, a cautionary reminder that evil does not always wear a monstrous face, but can sometimes reside in the quiet, unassuming neighbor next door. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that the most profound horrors often emerge not from supernatural forces, but from the twisted depths of the human mind. The Butcher of Plainfield, a name whispered in dread, ensures that the unsettling legacy of Ed Gein continues to reverberate, a perpetual shiver down the spine of history.